All right, how we doing, folks? It's been a few days. I spent last week kind of waiting for things to develop in some different situations, and develop they did. So today we're going to be talking mostly about Israel, Gaza. Over the last 5 days or so, Netanyahu finally announced what the plan was as far as occupying Gaza. It turns out it's going to be, just for now, it's occupying Gaza City. And then on top of that, yesterday on Sunday, an Israeli strike did kill, uh, according to Al Jazeera, killed a journalist. According to Israel, killed a Hamas terrorist. So interesting story coming out of that. And that journalist was very well known. Lots of tributes pouring in for him. In Lebanon, the Lebanese government has finally officially voted to get Hezbollah out of the country, which is part of a four-step process, U.S. disarmament plan that they will be enacting. In Azerbaijan and Armenia, President Trump actually helped broker a peace deal between those two countries. They've been fighting for decades. I think pretty much since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Those are both former USSR countries. And then finally, we'll just briefly touch on some incidents happening in Congo with some Rwandan-backed rebels. All right. So let's take a dive into Gaza here. So I've got an article and then a video that will kind of talk a little bit about the plans, and then some of the backlash that's happened from towards Israel over this plan. So here's what we know. And this article was a few days ago. I think this came out either Friday after the press conference or Saturday. Israel's security cabinet has approved a plan to take control of Gaza City in a controversial escalation of its war in Gaza. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians live in the city in the north of the Gaza Strip. It was the enclave's most populous city before the war. Several world leaders have condemned the plan, and the U.S. has warned it would lead to more massive forced displacement and more killing. Hamas warned of fierce resistance to the move. The plan also faces fierce opposition within Israel, including from military officials and hostages' families. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu told Fox News earlier that Israel planned to occupy the entire Gaza Strip and eventually hand it over to Arab forces. Much is still very unclear, and here's what we know so far. So here's the details, and this was a statement released by the office of Netanyahu. Said the IDF would prepare for taking control of Gaza City. It also outlined what it said were the 5 principles for ending the war. So this is what Netanyahu's and the Israeli government is basically saying has to happen before the war ends. First, the disarmament of Hamas, the return of all hostages, living and dead, the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip, Israeli security control over the Gaza Strip. Hey, what's up, Siwo? Establishment of an alternative civilian administration that is neither Hamas nor the Palestinian Authority. So I don't think any of that is too surprising outside of the Israeli security control of the Gaza Strip. It's kind of more or less been hinted that the Israelis would be taking over the Gaza Strip, but this is finally an official announcement, presumably starting with Gaza City. The IDF said the military would prepare to take control of Gaza City while providing humanitarian aid to the civilian population outside the combat zones. It's unclear if this is new aid and if it would be delivered by the controversial Israeli and U.S.-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the GHF. Hamas has said the approval of plans to occupy Gaza constitutes a new war crime. That's coming from Hamas. We warn the criminal occupation that this criminal adventure will cost it dearly and will not be an easy journey, said Hamas. So here's a little map. Now, there's 2.1 million people in Gaza, the Gaza Strip. So in this entire area, and of course, this is on the Mediterranean Sea. This is the southwest part of Israel that borders Egypt, and then you've got Jordan over here. So right now, all these red areas are currently occupied by the Israeli military. The white areas are not occupied. So you've got Gaza City here, you've got Deir al-Balah here, and you've got Khan Yunis here. Looks like they maybe have part of that city, according to where this mark kind of leaves off, but this might not be the most accurate. And then, of course, there's Rafah. Why is just Gaza City being taken? Before the cabinet meeting, Netanyahu said he wanted Israel to control all of Gaza, but in the new plan, only Gaza City is mentioned. Reports in Israel media suggest there were heated exchanges in the army's chief of staff, who voiced his strong opposition to a full takeover of Gaza. Israel said it currently holds 75%, while the UN estimates some 86% of the territory is either militarized zones or under evacuation orders. Plan aims to have Israeli forces move to take control of the largest city, which has already been heavily damaged by Israeli bombing and ground offenses. It is surrounded by land that has been under the IDF control or subject to an evacuation order. Control over the city is likely to be the first phase of a full-scale takeover of the Gaza Strip, says one Middle Eastern correspondent. My Google just went off on my phone. There has also been some speculation that the threat of full occupation could be part of a strategy to put pressure on Hamas to make concessions and stalled ceasefire negotiations. Netanyahu has said he does not want to keep Gaza, but he intends to hand it over to Arab forces, presumably after they feel as if they've gotten rid of Hamas, I would assume. But one thing they haven't made clear is who are the Arab forces? What does that look like? Because I think, Israel, they do need a coalition of Arabs to help really pull this off. We want to have a security perimeter. We don't want to govern it. All right. Now, a statement like that kind of leaves the door open maybe to a two-state solution, but also they've got their 5 stipulations here before they are going to end the war, which is getting Hamas out, which they said they'd never allow for the existence of a Palestinian state if Hamas is still around. So, this is potential if they were to succeed. Maybe the end result is that they would agree to a Palestinian state. But here we go. The scale of the crisis for Gazans. There's 2.1 million people in Gaza. The length of the Gaza Strip is similar to Greater London. So it's about 25 miles long. So this is a very small strip of land. And the area in Gaza City that is not under Israeli orders is similar in size to Heathrow Airport. So I think Heathrow Airport is the London International Airport. So basically the amount of space that is unoccupied in Gaza City by the Israelis is about the size of the airport in London. So it's a very small strip of land. When will Israel take over? Israel has not said when the takeover will begin, but reports in Israeli media suggest the military will not move into Gaza City immediately, and residents will need to leave first. All right, so they're going to presumably give time for people to leave the city before the military moves in, according to this. Israel said it believed the alternative plan presented to its cabinet would not achieve the defeat of Hamas or the return of the abductees. However, it is not clear what that alternative plan was or who had submitted it. Israeli media reports it was a more limited proposal from the Army's chief of staff. So the Army chief of staff, apparently the chief of staff of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, had a different plan from what they're going with, which is what Netanyahu's plan was. So that's interesting. Now, the Israeli chief of staff for the army, you would assume, has probably the most information about what's going on the ground. So since he had a different plan, that's interesting. But unfortunately, it's not clear what that plan was. We don't know. Netanyahu is being intentionally vague, in quotes, over which Arab forces, in quotes, he believes would run Gaza, according to BBC's chief international correspondent, as he has been in the past with his plans. He may be referring to Jordanians or Egyptians who have said they are willing to work with Israel, but they have made it clear they will not go into Gaza on the back of an Israeli occupation. Well, there you have it. So Israel wants to occupy Gaza City, and they want to eventually turn it over to Arab forces, is presumably a coalition force, multinational. But the Jordanians and the Egyptians won't go to Gaza if Israel is occupying it. So that is very interesting. Let's see what we got, Mr. Sewell. How are we to know any of the information coming out of Gaza when Hamas is not fabricated? Always my question when I'm reading stuff coming out of there. Yeah, I mean, you're very right. And I know there's a sentence in one of these articles I'm going to share on Israel, talking about how, the health ministry in Palestine is run by Hamas. So there's a lot of question as to like the accuracy of numbers and whatnot, but there is a quote in one of these articles. It might be in this one at the bottom. But the quote was that the United Nations trusts the numbers coming from the Hamas-led health ministry in Palestine, which is interesting. So the UN puts trust, faith, saying that those numbers are accurate. Very interesting. We can only go off of what's being put out, and that's kind of the point of talking about all this is you have Netanyahu kind of gives you an idea of what's going on, but he doesn't really explain details on how they're going to get from point A to point B. So there's a lot of interpretation there. And then the other side of it is you've got Hamas, and then you've got news organizations like Al Jazeera, who traditionally are going to side with the Palestinians, who have, very different viewpoints of what's happening. So it is very difficult to figure out what the truth is with all of this sometimes. Yeah, as well as Israel, are they finally allowing journalists back in? Yeah, that's a great question. What is the reasoning behind not allowing journalists in or out of Gaza? Is it to hide things? Is it to protect them? I'm sure the IDF would say it's to protect journalists. They don't want to kill any innocent journalists, but also maybe there are things that the Israelis don't want leaking out of the country. It's very possible. I mean, war is messy. It's ugly. Obviously, this is a huge conflict on a very small piece of land it's very densely populated. So it really is, for a conflict, it's a recipe for disaster when you have a densely populated area with people who are not allowed to leave the area. They'll shuffle people around a few miles here and a few miles there, but they're ultimately, none of these people are allowed to leave the Gaza Strip. Everyone's stuck there. And I think, if I remember right, Egypt has been unwilling to take refugees, even if they would be let out. Don't quote me on that. I think I read that earlier, a few weeks or months ago. But I think some of the countries around Israel have stated that they don't want Palestinian refugees in their country. Jordan and Egypt come to mind. I'm pretty sure I was right about that. And then Syria, Syria's got their own problems. I think the last thing they want are more refugees in Syria. Yeah, all we can do is try and use critical thinking and try and figure out, we use the information we know about Israel and the information we know about Palestine and Hamas, and try and discern through all of this and figure out what's actually going on here. Netanyahu is facing mounting criticism from hostage families and world leaders. So this is a big point why this is such a huge debate in Israel and really in the world, and the UN as well. Criticism from the hostage families. Hamas has essentially stated that, and they've done this in the past with these hostages. Once they fear the IDF is getting close to the location where they're holding someone, they then opt to execute that person. So naturally, with the announcement that the IDF is going to be occupying Gaza City, along with the knowledge that they think most of these living hostages are in Gaza City. Now, as one would expect, the families of those hostages are getting pretty worried about what's going to happen with their loved ones. UK Prime Minister Starmer has called Israel's escalation wrong and that it will only bring more bloodshed. Germany's Chancellor Merz said his government will not approve any exports of military equipment to Israel that could be used. So that's another big headline that happened over the weekend. The Germans are no longer going to send any sort of military equipment to Israel. And for those of you who don't know, the two largest supporters of Israel, one, of course, the United States, but the second largest is Germany. Um, there's very obvious reasons as to why. I think a lot of it has to do with trying to right some of the wrongs that happened in the the 30s and the 40s with the Holocaust and World War II, and the fact that basically Jews across Europe and Western Asia were more or less just forced out of their homes. Some were just executed on the spot. Others were sent to concentration camps. Some were sent to work camps. But when the war ended, those people couldn't go back home. And when Israel was established, the German government tried to make it a point to right some of the wrongs of what had happened previously, what, previous iterations of German government had done. Obviously, the Nazis we're talking about. I see us possibly turning our back on them as well. The last thing that I saw Trump said, oh, and here we got the quote right here. The U.S. has been much less critical. On Tuesday, so this is Tuesday last week, this is about 6 days ago, President Trump said it was pretty much up to Israel whether they fully occupy Gaza, and Washington's ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, said the plan is not America's concern. That is very interesting. It's not our job to tell them what they should or should not do. So, of course, I'm not going to talk about Ukraine and Russia today. We'll save that for tomorrow or the next day. But of course, right now in the news, on Friday, President Trump and President Putin are going to be meeting in Alaska. So it's very interesting that, we're taking a very hands-off approach, the United States government, with what's happening in Gaza, while simultaneously basically saying, stand aside Zelensky, President Zelensky from Ukraine. Well, we're going to talk to the Russians and try and get a deal done to end that war. So it's very interesting how kind of opposite those two viewpoints are from one war to the next on behalf of the United States government. Seen that coming with Gaza, yeah. Expected us to just walk away. It's not surprising to me either. I think the United States probably will continue giving weapons and aid to Israel. I don't think it's going to end. I think in many ways Israel is kind of my camera's going off. Israel's kind of they're out there in the Middle East. They're kind of the eyes and ears, more or less, for the United States in a lot of ways. In terms of the sectarian violence, the different clashes between radical Islamists, Jews, Christians, whatever, in the Middle East, there's just so many facets of conflict and disagreements going on. And having an ally as strong as Israel located where they are, right here on the edge of the Mediterranean Sea in the Middle East, these are all Muslim nations, Arab nations. You've got Iran, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Jordan, Egypt. It's very good for the United States, obviously, to have a strong ally here. And it wouldn't surprise me if the United States is just going to kind of turn a blind eye, unfortunately, sad as that sounds, to what's happening here. The United States has pretty much ignored the accumulative calling for a second for a two-state solution. Over the recent weeks, it kind of started with France and then the UK, and then now you got Germany, Australia joined in. So some very prominent Western nations are all kind of starting to say collectively, we need a two-state solution, while the United States kind of says, yeah, we're going to let Israel handle that. So it's AMG. How you doing? Yeah, we still give them billions of dollars a year. Yeah, very much so. Very much so. All right. So there's one article on Gaza. We're gonna watch a quick video here. So this was from ABC. Sorry for the ad here, but this is from ABC. We'll get their take on this, and this is about the backlash from these announcements.
You can get in the Middle East. Israel is facing backlash for its plans to occupy Gaza City. The Israeli Security Cabinet approving the plan that's part of a broader initiative for control of the entire Gaza Strip. Also outlined the establishment of a new civil administration to govern Gaza that includes neither Hamas nor the Palestinian Authority. Hamas reacting to all of this, calling the plan a war crime that will come at a high cost for the hostages still in captivity. This unfolding as humanitarian groups continue to sound alarm bells about the growing hunger crisis and overall catastrophic conditions inside the war-torn territory. Desperate scenes like the ones you're seeing right there, showing Palestinians scrambling to reach airdropped aid, and moments later, that balcony collapsing. Just so difficult to watch. For more on this, let's bring in former Senior Director for Counterterrorism on the National Security Council, Javed Ali. Thank you so much for joining us here on ABC News Live. Javed, how realistic is Israel's plan to achieve full operational control of Gaza?
Well, nice to be with you. And the question of what will it take for Israel to achieve this vision that Prime Minister Netanyahu or the Israeli National Security Cabinet has laid out, this is unclear, because I would have to imagine there are going to be multiple lines of effort in this plan, and each line of effort will be dedicated to achieving certain military objectives. So this is going to take a lot of time, a lot of capability that perhaps Israel hasn't used already. This is going to require the mobilization of tens of thousands, if not more, of additional reservists who aren't already in other parts of Gaza right now. And then again, within each line of effort, depending on what the goals and objectives are, how will they be able to measure progress and eventually get to this end state that you talked about earlier, where you will not have governance by either Hamas or the Palestinian Authority. So in between the plan starting and the end of the plan, I think there are a lot of questions that none of us have the answers to right now.
Yeah, it just seems as though the situation isn't getting any better. We continue to see the unimaginable conditions Palestinians are experiencing there in the territory. How could Israel's plan worsen the massive displacement that's already taken place over the course of this war?
Well, this is another aspect of the plan that may be a line of effort in it, is what will be the new features of humanitarian aid going forward. Will they try to have more Palestinians and in even a smaller physical space where they are now? That has advantages and disadvantages. Obviously, the security around these aid sites and how Palestinians will be able to get to all the get to that aid, and who's going to rebuild all the hospitals and medical facilities in which Palestinians are going to need to have care as well. So as the territory shrinks and you have more Israeli troops now coming eventually into the territory, this is another one of these questions. It's just not clear how this even humanitarian line of effort is going to look.
Yeah, there's so much that's just unknown. And there is so much reaction from the international community. What sort of pressure could Israel face from the international community?
Well, we've already seen over the past couple of weeks a number of countries, France, Canada, UK, all indicate that they either already have or will in the run up to the UN General Assembly meeting in New York in September to recognize Palestinian statehood. And there are other statements coming out from the UN and other international organizations, all sort of condemning what's happening now and even the potential for this full occupation plan. But I still go back to the point I've made time and time again in multiple interviews that at the end of the day, I think it's really only the United States that has the leverage to put enough pressure on Israel to change course in any direction Israel is headed, whether it's this plan or something else. So until we get to that point, I don't think the international pressure is going to move the needle that much.
Right. Might increase just a bit. All right, John.
All right. Well, there you have it. Kind of a couple of things I said, but there's point A, there's point B, and we don't know what's happening in between. And then, he mentioned next month there's going to be a General Assembly in the United States where a lot of countries are going to come and talk about what's happening in Israel, presumably. And he expects some of the representatives of those nations to state their case there for the two-state solution, which has, of course, already been done on the world stage. There was a UN conference about a week or two ago that lasted hours and hours and hours. And every nation, basically, that was part of the UN got to add their personal opinions on the Palestinians' situation. And I mean, it was pretty much unanimous that across the board, people want a two-state solution. All right. Got a new article, or another one, rather. Netanyahu defends Gaza plans. U.S. UN ambassadors have condemned Israel's plans to take control of Gaza City, as PM Netanyahu insisted it was the best way to end the war. During a press conference, which Netanyahu said was intended to puncture the lies, the Israeli leaders said the planned offensive would move fairly quickly and would free Gaza from Hamas. Yeah, it's a good idea, Sewell. I've been posting after I go live. I probably should be posting before. That's a good call. Meanwhile, Israel came under heavy criticism at an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council with the UK, France, and others warning the plan violated international humanitarian law. Oh, and then also Netanyahu claimed the Israeli hostages in Gaza were the only ones being deliberately starved, and he denied that Israel was starving any Gazans. Along with Denmark, Greece, and Slovenia, they called for the plan to be reversed, adding it would do nothing to secure the return of hostages and risks further endangering their lives. Other council members expressed similar alarm. China called the collective punishment of people in Gaza unacceptable, while Russia warned against a reckless intensification of hostilities. It's never a good thing when China and Russia are criticizing you. UN Assistant Secretary General Jenka told the meeting if the plans are implemented, they will likely trigger another calamity in Gaza, reverberating across the region and causing further forced displacement, killings, and destruction. So I think that's kind of the big worry with this, is that occupying Gaza City, taking things, up a notch with this war, is going to have that result where it kind of lights the candle box that is the tinder box rather that is the Middle East, because ultimately, a lot of this people may inevitably side on a religious base. So you've got Jewish people and Muslim people. Of course, there's only 10 million or so, I think, people in Israel, surrounded by a billion Muslims around them. So ultimately, the Israelis do have to be careful, because if the entire Middle East turned against them over this, they would be in extreme amount of danger. And it's not something that I don't know the United States could save them from. The UN's humanitarian office said the hunger crisis in Gaza was no longer looming, added that it is starvation, pure and simple. But the United States is defending Israel, with Ambassador Shea telling the meeting the U.S. had been working tirelessly to free hostages and end the war, and the meeting undermined those efforts. She added the war could end today if Hamas let the hostages go, and accused the other members of taking advantage of the meeting to accuse Israel of genocide, an allegation she insisted was demonstrably false. Later on, Netanyahu's office said he had spoken with President Trump about the plans. Thousands of protesters have also taken to the streets across Israel. So that's another interesting thing is, the Israeli population is starting to turn against this. And a lot of that has to do with the status of the hostages and what's going to happen to them when this occupation starts. A lot of people assume, I think, that once the occupation starts, those hostages are going to be executed. And if that happens, I mean, Netanyahu's probably going to have to flee Israel. No joke. Like, he might have to run. In his press conference, Netanyahu said the IDF has been instructed to dismantle the 2 remaining Hamas strongholds in Gaza City and a central area around al-Mawasi. He also outlined a 3-step plan to increase aid in Gaza, including designated safe corridors for humanitarian aid distribution as well as more airdrops. He said the plan would also include increasing the number of safe distribution points managed by the GHF. The UN reported earlier this month that 1,373 Palestinians had been killed seeking food since late May. So basically June, July. So basically in about 2.5-ish months, the UN is saying that nearly 1,400 Palestinians have been killed just trying to get food. Netanyahu claimed Hamas had violently looted the aid trucks, and when asked about Palestinians killed at GHF sites, said a lot of firing was done by Hamas. It's a very short explanation for presumably, the deaths of 1,300 people. Now, the UN, I think it might be this article. Yeah. So in the past, figures from the Hamas-run health ministry were widely used in times of conflict and seen as reliable by the United Nations and other international organizations. So there are some very big organizations like the UN and others who give credibility to these numbers that are provided by the Hamas-run health ministry. So it really leads to question, how many people have died. If you listen to the Israelis, it's probably very few. If you listen to the UN and the Palestinian, more or less government, which kind of doesn't really exist, but the health ministry is run by Hamas, they're saying it's, almost 1,400 people, basically. All right. Next, we're going to talk about the journalist that was killed. This AP article. Israel targets and kills Al Jazeera correspondent Anas al-Sharif in Gaza as journalist toll grows. Israel's military targeted and killed an Al Jazeera correspondent and others with an airstrike late Sunday in Gaza after press advocates said an Israeli smear campaign stepped up when Anas al-Sharif cried on air over starvation. So the man who was killed was posting, I believe, on X and wherever else he could. He was talking about starvation recently. And apparently after that, Israel started allegedly running a smear campaign against him. Both Israel and hospital officials in Gaza City confirmed the deaths of al-Sharif and colleagues, which the Committee to Protect Journalists and others described as retribution against those documenting the war in Gaza. Very interesting. Israel's military asserted that al-Sharif had led a Hamas cell, an allegation that Al Jazeera and al-Sharif previously dismissed as baseless. All right. So first of all, the first thing to notice from this, I think the last time I read, there's been something like 200 journalists and cameramen and whatnot killed in this conflict so far. And almost every time that that's happened, the Israelis have come out and denied it or just not acknowledged it, period. With this, they basically came out right away and said, "Yep, we did that. That man was a terrorist. He's part of Hamas. He runs, I think they said runs a Hamas cell. I can't remember exactly what they said he did. They said he had done something about like shooting rockets at civilians, and he was in charge of a group of people that was doing that. So Israel's contention, he was a press reporter by day, a terrorist by night, essentially. Let's see. Will Netanyahu says that 60% of those who post critical things about Israel are bots, especially in America. He also says that the algorithm is driving criticism of Israel, and most concerningly, he said, we have to contend with it. Why does a prime minister of another country think he can deal with Americans and our social media? Yeah, right. Yeah, or bots for that matter. Yeah, I mean, I will say, just as someone who's trying to, get all sides of the story, you definitely see more criticism of Israel than you see support of it. Now, is that because of an algorithm, or is that because of maybe the pictures that are coming out of Gaza? I've also seen claims from the Israelis that some of the pictures, and I'll show one of these, some of the pictures coming out of Gaza, particularly like this, they're being staged, according to the country Israel on X. If you look at Israel's X account, you will see photos like this zoomed out from another perspective. And, their contention is these are staged photos, that there's no starvation going on. But at the same time, they won't let journalists in and out to report on what's really happening. And then you've got this Al Jazeera journalist who he clearly does have a history of reporting. Now, we can't confirm whether or not he's part of Hamas. What we can confirm is that there's a lot of pictures of him running around in Palestine with a press vest on, making reports. He's got a long history on his X account of basically reporting what's happening. So he very much does at least appear to be a journalist, or he's doing a very good job of coming off as a journalist, which could be part of Hamas's strategy. We know that Hamas has no basically respect for human life or dignity or any of that. So would they essentially embed someone with Al Jazeera while simultaneously having them as a Hamas terrorist? Yeah, they totally could do something like that. I tend to think of people overestimate the U.S. and its leverage on Israel. When I was in the Gulf War, it was all the U.S. could do to keep their finger off the trigger when Iraq was bombing the crap out of them. It was only then I realized any opinion on this matter was futile. Yeah. And the fact a solution to the issue has eluded many people for a very long time. Yeah. I just want the killing to stop regardless of the solution to get there. Yeah, exactly, MG. The Middle East is incessantly a confusing situation, and it's because it's super dynamic. It's always developing. One day there's two Islamic groups fighting each other, and the next day they're allied with each other fighting a Western nation like the United States. And then the United States leaves, and those two groups start fighting each other again. So keeping track of all this stuff and who's who and who's on what side, it's never ending. So you're talking about the Gulf War back in 1991, I believe. That was almost 35 years ago. And we're more or less talking about a lot of the same stuff. Is Israel in or Gaza rather in a better or worse position now than they were in 91? In 91, obviously there wasn't this large conflict going on. But I think it was up until 2005, Israel did occupy Gaza and the West Bank. In the mid 2000s, they left. And I think, Netanyahu probably contends that had Israeli forces not left Gaza and the West Bank in the mid-2000s, maybe the Hamas attack on October 7th would have never happened. That might be his opinion, is that, we allowed this to happen by caving to pressures around the world to, free Palestine, so to speak. And then, 20 years later, not quite, they're dealing with the October 7th attack. And now Netanyahu's plan is essentially, we need to finish the job. We need to get Hamas the hell out. And he brings up what's happening in Lebanon. After we wrap up Israel here in a minute, we'll talk about Lebanon. But the Lebanese just voted to get Hezbollah out of Lebanon, to disarm them, to send them away. And I think Netanyahu sees that success and he says, well, we can do the same thing with Hamas. Now, the situation's a little bit different. Hezbollah is in Lebanon. Hamas is in Gaza, right there in Israel. So it's a little bit different of a situation. Yeah, the killing just needs to end. Both sides have been caught in the last few years fabricating things. Yeah, and that's the other thing is it's hard to trust either side. The Israelis, because they like to be very quiet about stuff. And then Hamas, I mean, they've just told blatant lies for years. Well documented. Can't be absolute about everything. Yeah. The U.S. is not always the good guys. Exactly. The U.S., I think, a lot of times thinks that they're being the good guys, but then, in hindsight, you see what happens later, and it's like, oh, geez. It was Saudi Arabia and the United States who armed Al Qaeda in the 90s or the late 80s and early 90s against the Soviets. And then the leader of that group, Osama bin Laden, ended up turning around and attacking America, allegedly, depending on what you believe on 9/11. But he definitely never denied it. So there's that. But Al Qaeda, radical Sunnis, but we supported them at one time. You know who else is radical Sunnis? ISIS. So that's why the Middle East is as messed up as it is because these people, they change allegiances, and then one day they're allies with America so that they can fight a war against someone else. And then as soon as that war is over, now they're no longer allies with America, and now they're at war with America. So yeah, it's a vicious circle. Yeah, exactly. Not a lot has changed in the Middle East. It's, some of the players have changed. Some of the names of the groups have changed. There's some new military organizations. There's some older organizations that have disappeared. But ultimately, it's more of the same here out in the Middle East for the most part. Now, what you do have with Israel is it seems like Egypt and Jordan are supporting the ousting of Hamas to an extent. I think they want Hamas gone. But they also, they're not really providing much other than some aid drops here and there that they're dropping for the Palestinians. All right. We're going to read what Al Jazeera has to say about this strike. Tributes condemnation poor. Now, Al Jazeera, just real quick to give a little perspective of who Al Jazeera is. I think it is important. Who is Jazeera? So it's a Qatari state-funded media conglomerate. So Al Jazeera is funded by the Qatari government. So that's important to know. All right. It's known for its international news channels, Al Jazeera English, and then Al Jazeera Arabic. So they've got two channels. One's in English, one's in Arabic. It was founded in 1996 and is one of the largest and most influential international news networks. Al Jazeera's mission includes in-depth journalism, presenting multiple angles to stories, championing stories, maintaining journalistic integrity, and pioneering new storytelling techniques. So it's state-funded, but it is independent. While funded by Qatar, Al Jazeera strives for editorial independence and has a reputation for challenging established narratives and authorities, particularly in the Arab world. So on one hand, this is a Arab kind of Muslimist publication. However, Qatar is a little more modernized than some of these Arab countries that have like, Sharia law or kind of the crazy like Wahhabi Sunnis and stuff like in Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, they still cut people's heads off for crimes and stuff like that. So they still lock up people for being gay. In Saudi Arabia, they just allowed women to start driving like, I don't think it was even 10 years ago. So while, we talk a lot about the Shia extremists, I mean, the Sunni extremists are really not better. And it seems like Al Jazeera at times will counter some of those non-modernized things that happen in the Arab world. So that's just a very brief rundown of who Al Jazeera is. It's important to know that, more times than not, they're going to, in a situation like this where you've got Jews on one end and you've got, Muslims on the other. Are they going to side with the Palestinians? Yeah, probably. But are they going to be critical of Hamas? Presumably, yeah, they will. So let's read this real quick. Tributes condemnation pour in over slain Al Jazeera journalists. Israel's killing of 5 Al Jazeera staff in Gaza prompts global outrage and calls for accountability. So this is Anas al-Sharif. Obviously, this man made a lot of reports, a lot of contributions to the reports over the years. I haven't seen, I'm sure in this article it'll say how long he was with Al Jazeera, but from their viewpoint, he's nothing more than an on-the-ground reporter. And then Israel says they have extensive intelligence saying that he is part of Hamas. Israel had said that they had like evidence of payments and other documents with this guy's name on it showing that he was part of a Hamas-led cell. So let's look at this real quick. An outpouring of grief and condemnation has followed the Israeli assassination of 5 Al Jazeera staff in Gaza, including prominent correspondent Anas al-Sharif. The drone attack late on Sunday hit a tent for journalists positioned outside the main gate of Gaza City's Al-Shifa hospital, killing 7 people. Among the dead were Al Jazeera correspondents, Al Jazeera camera operators. So there's 1 correspondent, 3 camera operators, and then of course Anas al-Sharif, who was a well-known correspondent. 6 journalists, a freelance reporter was also reportedly killed in the attack. Reporters Without Borders said 3 more journalists were wounded in the strike. Just hours earlier, al-Sharif, 28, had posted on X about Israel's intense, concentrated bombardment on eastern and southern Gaza City. Known for his fearless reporting from northern Gaza, he had become one of the most recognizable voices documenting the ongoing Israeli genocide in the enclave. So you can kind of tell with some of the language of this article, they call it an assassination. They're calling what's happening in Palestine a genocide. So, some stuff to keep in mind. Whether or not it's a genocide is kind of for the world to decide. A lot of people will absolutely say it's a genocide. Other people will say it's not. It's a war. It's a conflict. That's what happens, I guess, is what they would say. The Al Jazeera media network has condemned what it called a targeted assassination of its journalists. Below are some of the responses to the killing. Palestine, the Palestinian mission to the UN, accused Israel of deliberately assassinating al-Sharif and Krekef. I apologize for butchering his name. Described them as among the last remaining journalists in Gaza. They have systematically and dutifully exposed and documented Israel's genocide and starvation, the mission said on X. As Israel continues to ethnically cleanse Gaza, its enemy remains the truth, the brave journalists exposing its heinous crimes. Hamas has also decried Israel's assassination. In a statement, the Palestinian group described the attack as part of a widespread targeting of journalists, unprecedented in any war, says the killings aim to silence media coverage in Gaza before major crimes planned against Palestinians in the besieged territory. So Hamas is basically saying they're trying to kill all the journalists before they start this occupation, because their occupation is going to be an extension of the crimes and the genocide. That is Hamas's viewpoint. All right. Iran, the Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesman has called on the world to hold Israel to account for the killing. Press badge is no shield against genocidal war criminals who feel the world witnesses their atrocities. It's an interesting comment from Iran. Qatari Prime Minister Mohammed bin Abdulrahman bin Jassim Al. Geez, that is one heck of a name. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 names in one. Wow. Has strongly criticized Israel over the killing of Al Jazeera journalists, calling it a shocking violation of press freedom. Al-Thani, who also serves as foreign minister, said the deaths have showed the deliberate targeting of journalists by Israel in the Gaza Strip, and it reveals how the crimes are beyond imagination. Yeah, holy heck. See, well, that's one hell of a name. Amid the inability of the international community and its laws to stop this tragedy. In a post on social media, he added, "May God have mercy on journalists, on those who were killed." The United Nations, all right, so let's get some kind of westernized opinions here. UN Secretary Guterres spokesperson offered condolences to the Al Jazeera family. We've always been very clear in condemning all killings of journalists in Gaza and everywhere. Media workers should be able to carry out their work freely and without harassment, intimidation, or fear of being targeted. Now, that's one of the things that this is going to result in is any journalists left in Gaza after this, if they weren't afraid for their own personal safety already, one, they're crazy, but two, they will be now. UNRWA, the head of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, Filipe Lazzarini, said in a post on X, the Israeli army continues to silence voices reporting atrocities from Gaza. I am horrified by the killing of another 5 journalists in Gaza City. Since the war began, more than 200 Palestinian journalists have been reported killed in total impunity. The UN Human Rights Office says, the Office for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights condemned the killings, saying the actions represented a grave breach of international humanitarian law. I think we get the point at this point. Amnesty International has condemned it. The Human Rights Watch, Reporters Without Borders, the National Press Club, the Council on American Islamic Relations. It's journalists killed. We've got more than 270 journalists and media workers, mostly Palestinian, have been killed. Now, this is a list of all the names of those 269. They're calling them Palestinians. Now, remember, here's 3 Lebanese and a couple Israelis, 2 reporters that have been killed in the war. Now, remember, once the war started, Israel closed down the ability for anyone to leave. So all these people, some of these presumably would have left if they had the choice. Some of them would have stayed and maybe would have ended up dying regardless. But essentially all of these names are in one way, shape, or another. They were essentially credentialed reporters, according to this graphic. Now this graphic's coming from Al Jazeera, so of course keep that in mind. But of course, I would assume these Lebanese were probably killed in Lebanon and some of the strikes there. The Israelis were probably killed by, Hamas missiles or Hezbollah missiles, I would assume. Yeah. It's a very sad situation. Whenever journalists are dying, it's going to get national attention every time. I think up until now, it hasn't been a huge story because a lot of those journalists were probably smaller media outlets that existed in Palestine. I don't know that any of those were necessarily tied to an organization as big as Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is more or less, I don't know what you compare them to. I don't know if saying they're the Associated Press of the Middle East is really a fair comparison. Or the Reuters, the BBC of the Middle East, but they do, this is their area that they cover. this whole part of the world here. Predominantly, they cover events all over the world and how they do or don't impact the Middle East, but this is their bread and butter. And they are by far the largest, most reputable organization in this part of the world, Al Jazeera. So that's why this has become such a huge story when in other instances, and we're just looking at the map here, but this here, this is their part of the world. So I'm going to real quick, we're going to mark Gaza City on our map here for the soon-to-be occupation that will begin. Gaza City. Let's get it clearly marked. All right. Pending occupation / journalists killings. All right. That is all for today for Israel-Palestine. Well, not totally. We're going to talk about Lebanon next. So Hezbollah ministers walk out of cabinet meeting as Beirut is the capital, of course, of Lebanon, approves a U.S. disarmament plan. So I talked about last week, there was going to be a coming meeting within the Lebanese government where they were going to discuss what to do with Hezbollah. And of course, we looked up the makeup of the Lebanese government. We'll go over this again real quick. Let's see. Unicameral body. So a one-party body with 128 members, or not one party, a single entity, 128 members elected by proportional representation. All right. So we want to look at the Parliament of Lebanon. And of course, this is by the numbers. There are 19 strong republics. And then right after that, you have 15 loyalty to the resistance, which is Hezbollah. So Hezbollah has 15 seats in this 128-seat government, which is, roughly, 12, 13%. So this 128-member body was getting together to vote on what they were going to do with a U.S.-led plan that was going to essentially disarm Hezbollah. So that is where we are here. I read Al Jazeera a ton, but you didn't know who they were? Yes, you will. So Al Jazeera, it's you got to kind of take it with a grain of salt because they are heavily cited towards, their own people of the area of the world that they live in, but also they will be critical of radicals and whatnot. Now, in the Palestinian conflict, with the Israelis, they're pretty much always going to side with the Palestinian people. Now, they don't. I highly doubt Al Jazeera sides with Hamas or anything, but you have Israel saying that the Al Jazeera reporter that was just killed was Hamas. So what do we know? I don't know. It's tough, man. It's tough. Proposal lays out, so back to Lebanon, proposal lays out 4 phases that would lead to terror groups, missiles, and drones being dismantled by the end of the year. And this is what they voted in favor for. The Lebanese government approved last Thursday the objectives of a U.S. proposal that would ultimately lead to the disarming the disarming of the Hezbollah terror group. Hezbollah ministers and Muslim Shiite allies walked out of the discussion on the plan, 3 Lebanese political sources told Reuters, days after the Iran-backed group lashed out at an earlier announcement of a plan to disarm them, calling the move a grave sin and vowing to act as if it did not exist. So Hezbollah is essentially saying we will ignore this order, and then they're presumably going to be breaking apart from the Lebanese government. The Lebanese information minister, Paul Marcos, these ads are just despicable, included the gradual end of the presence of non-state armed groups in the country, including Hezbollah, both north and south of the Litani River, but said that the full details of the plan were not discussed in depth. Marcos stated that the principles to which Lebanon agreed also include enduring Israel's withdrawal from the Lebanese territory and the cessation of all hostilities, including ground, aerial, and maritime violations. So there's been a ceasefire going on for the last few months between Israel and Lebanon. Now, Israel has continued to do targeted strikes on Hezbollah. Whether it's weapon caches or meetings of Hezbollah officials, what have you, they've continued those strikes in spite of the ceasefire. In a press conference following the cabinet meeting, Marcos was asked how Hezbollah's disarmament would be carried out in light of the group's refusal to cooperate. He responded that the decisions would be implemented in accordance with a plan to be submitted by the Lebanese army by the end of August, which will include a timeline for disarmament by 2025. According to a copy of the Lebanese cabinet agenda reviewed by Reuters, the U.S. proposal submitted by Trump's envoy to the region set out the most detailed steps yet for disarming Hezbollah and for a full Israeli withdrawal from 5 key posts in South Lebanon. Well, there you have it. So the United States has presented this plan to the Lebanese government, presumably with approval of the Israelis, because it will require the IDF to withdraw from southern Lebanon, which they currently have, it said, 5 different outposts, essentially. Barak hailed on Thursday Beirut's historic decision in improving the framework. In a post on X, Barak congratulated Lebanese leaders for making the historic, bold, and correct decision this week to begin fully implementing the ceasefire deal. This week's cabinet resolutions finally put into motion the one nation, one army solution for Lebanon. We stand behind the Lebanese people. So the United States is trying to foster some sort of unity in Lebanon. Like we were looking at this parliament, look at all these different parties that they have in the government. I mean, it's a lot of different players. This is, in the United States, we have Republicans and Democrats. And a lot of people in the United States call for more parties, but sometimes this is what you get. There's this many groups jockeying for power. When you have this many different groups, how do you ever agree on anything? It's pretty surprising they were able to agree on this deal. Let's see. Israel dealt major blows to Hezbollah in an offensive last year. The climax of a conflict that began on October 8th when the Lebanese group started firing rockets and drones at Israel on a daily basis in support of its ally Hamas, which had invaded the Jewish state a day prior, which that, of course, killed 1,200 people and took the 251 hostages. U.S. disarmament proposal aims to extend and stabilize a ceasefire agreement between Lebanon and Israel that was brokered last November. So, again, this is potentially going to increase stability in the region. If Israel can no longer face threat from Lebanon, it really greatly diminishes Hamas's power too, because like this just said, the day after October 7th, Hezbollah in Lebanon started launching rockets at the Israelis. So you had Hamas, who came over, we wanted that in Gaza City. It's over there somewhere. Hamas came over the wall on October 7th and started killing predominantly innocent civilians, and then took their hostages back over the wall into Gaza. And then the day after, in Lebanon, all of Hezbollah started launching missiles, presumably to Acre, to Haifa, to Nazareth, to Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, what have you. So Israel was facing attacks from multiple angles when this war began back at the end of 2003. The urgency of this proposal is underscored by the increasing number of complaints regarding Israeli violations of the ceasefire, including airstrikes and cross-border operations, which risk triggering a collapse of the fragile status quo. So basically what this is saying is they want this deal to kind of hurry up and get things rolling, because the Israelis have not stopped and they really haven't honored the ceasefire, which was brokered last November. So this is, we're 9 months into this ceasefire that hasn't been honored, and people are kind of losing their patience in Lebanon, presumably. Phase 1 of the plan requires Beirut government to issue a decree within 15 days committing to Hezbollah's full disarmament by the end of this year, December 31st, 2025. Phase 2 requires Lebanon to begin implementing the disarmament plan within 60 days, with the government approving a detailed deployment plan to support the plan to bring all arms under the authority of the state. All right. During phase 3, within 90 days, Israel will withdraw from the final 2 of 5 points it holds, and funding will be secured to initiate rubble removal in Lebanon and infrastructure rehabilitation in preparation for reconstruction. So part of this plan, if Lebanon follows through, they're going to get reconstruction help. That's good. I mean, here's the thing. With every war comes a phase of rebuilding, rehabilitation, reconstruction. There's infrastructure in the country of Lebanon that needs to be replaced, rebuilt. And you can't just end a war and walk away and expect people to be happy when you leave them with the damaged infrastructure. In phase 4, within 120 days, Hezbollah's remaining heavy weapons must be dismantled, including missiles and drones. Also in phase 4, the United States, Saudi Arabia, France, Qatar, and other friendly states will organize an economic conference to support the Lebanese economy and reconstruction, and to implement President Trump's vision for the return of Lebanon as a prosperous and viable country. Well, if all of this goes through, things could potentially get a lot better in Lebanon. Hezbollah ministers, allies walk out of the meeting. That's pretty expected. I mean, they're not going to be happy, right? Because the country that they're in and that they're allegedly fighting for is trying to get them out now. Iran, Hezbollah's military and financial backer, said on Wednesday that any decision on disarmament will ultimately rest with Hezbollah itself. So Iran is saying Hezbollah will decide if they want to be disarmed or not. Interesting. We support it from afar, but we do not intervene in its decisions, Foreign Minister Arakchi said, saying the group had rebuilt itself after the war with Israel. So Iran's kind of saying, we don't really have much to do with none of that. Nope, my camera's going off again. Anytime I use my hands, my camera thinks I want to zoom in or something. Citing political sources with knowledge of the matter, pro-Hezbollah newspaper Al Akbar said the group and its allies could choose to withdraw their 4 ministers from the government or trigger a no-confidence vote in parliament by the Shiite bloc, which comprises 27 of the 128 lawmakers. So the radical Shiite bloc, it seems, has about 1/5 of Lebanon's government. Interesting. Israel, which routinely carries out strikes in Lebanon despite the ceasefire, says it's responding to violations of the agreement, has already signaled it would not hesitate to launch destructive operations if Beirut fails to disarm the group. Since the beginning of the ceasefire, the IDF says it has carried out over 500 airstrikes against Hezbollah targets, killing at least 230 operations and destroying dozens of sites belonging to the terror group, saying they violated the terms of the truce. So the terms of the ceasefire were that some of these sites had to be cleared, had to be moved north of a river in Lebanon. And since those things did not happen, the IDF says that's the reason why they've carried out those strikes. Under the ceasefire agreement, Israel is entitled to act against immediate threats posed by Hezbollah, but must forward complaints about long-term threats to an oversight committee. Interesting. All right. So stability in Lebanon. That's well, let me get back here just so we can look at this map for a second. But again, just looking at this, you've got Lebanon here with Hezbollah. Most of Hezbollah is in the north. And then you've got Israel directly south. They share this border. So, and this is where Hezbollah militants have been operating out of for a long time. I'll place this down. We'll type Hezbollah disarmament agreed upon by Beirut government. Make that nice and big. That is a very important development in this war. So essentially, we're still talking about the Israeli war post October 7th. This is all kind of more or less the same thing. All right. So, it seems like President Trump has laid forth a plan that the government of Lebanon likes and that they want to happen. And within that plan, they're going to be slowly, first they have to issue a decree saying that they're going to kick Hezbollah out. And then I think within, it said 90 or 120 days, they essentially got to have all the weapons destroyed or turned over, presumably. If they do that, Lebanon is going to get significant reconstruction efforts and help from neighboring countries around the region, like Saudi Arabia, who, they have deep pockets. They're willing to help these guys rebuild. Now, remember, Saudi Arabia and the Iranians are very, very long-time enemies. So with Iran backing these groups in Lebanon, it is of interest to Saudi Arabia to invest in Lebanon and to try and gain Lebanon's support for their cause, which would result in them, being far less likely of allowing these Iranian, aka Shiite, radical-backed groups from existing in their country. So it is it's probably, honestly, the United States, Donald Trump will never waste an opportunity to pat himself on the back for brokering a peace deal. But all things considered, it's probably more of an interest for Saudi Arabia to see these out than it is for the United States, potentially, because it's one less radical Shiite stronghold that Saudi Arabia has to worry about, because they're still dealing with the Houthis south of them in Yemen, who I don't think I've ever even talked about on this stream yet. All right, but that is what you have going on in Lebanon for the day. So very quickly, we got two more things we're going to talk about. Two more. Azerbaijan and Armenia. Not something you hear about a lot, but there has been a war going on there for decades. And we were just talking about a Trump brokered peace deal. We have another one right here. So this is a very interesting one. And this is coming from the American publication Politico, which generally is not very Trump friendly. Their writers over there. However, peace is peace, right? Trump embraces role of peacemaker in Azerbaijan and Armenia deal. Of course, if you're a fan of the band System of a Down, you're probably familiar with them, championing peace efforts and stuff for their Armenian. And Armenia, of course, is the smaller country of the two, which has dealt with a lot of oppression from their neighboring Azerbaijanians over the decades since the collapse of the Soviet Union. The Biden administration's efforts to end the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict set the stage for the deal, but the Trump team got it over the finish line. So it seems like the politicals reluctantly giving Trump a little bit of credit here. President Trump signed a deal with the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan on Friday to end decades of fighting, a diplomatic victory that also helps Trump in his push to present himself as a peacemaker on the world stage. Now, got to give credit where it's due. Cambodia and Thailand have ceased their conflict. We just read about what's happening in Lebanon and the deal that Trump's envoy set forth that the Lebanese government has agreed upon. Now you've got another peace deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan, which President Trump's hands again have been involved in, which is very interesting. He's coming out trying to make himself as a peacemaker. And of course, on Friday, coming up in 4 or 5 days, he's going to be meeting with Putin in Alaska. This is very interesting. This is maybe not necessarily what a lot of people would expect from President Trump, depending on what your viewpoint is on him. And yet, this is now his third instance of getting a peace deal signed during this first year of his second presidency. Signed a deal. We read that. Trump was jubilant at the signing ceremony at the White House. Okay, so this they brought the Azerbaijani president and the Armenian prime minister to the White House on Friday to do this. Very interesting. I didn't know that. Trump proclaimed an end to a bitter conflict between the two Caucasus countries, which produced dozens of wars and skirmishes between the two neighbors over the last 35 years, and voiced confidence that the peace would hold in the long term. Very interesting. Now they're friends, and they're going to be friends for a very long time, said Trump. You two are going to have a great relationship, and if you don't, call me and I'll straighten it out. In achieving a long, elusive deal that has the potential to reshape a geostrategically critical region of the crossroads of Europe and Asia, Trump benefited from good timing and years of concentrated diplomatic efforts from the high-level officials in the Biden administration. So apparently this has been long in the making. Biden, he was president for 4 years, apparently had some high-level officials that were working on getting this started at the very least. And it seems as if in this first year of Trump's presidency, he took over in January, so 7 months in, they've been able to finish the culmination of those efforts, which presumably have been going on for 3, 4, 5 years now. Armenia and Azerbaijan have also shown a much greater willingness to negotiate an end to their conflict. So it seems as if perhaps with maybe it's because Trump is president now. Maybe it's just because enough time has passed where they've been talking about these things, but they finally came to a point where the two countries were willing to, for whatever reason, they're willing to finally broker this peace deal. Per administration officials who briefed reporters ahead of the signing ceremony, who would ultimately put the deal over the metaphorical goal line, was Trump's decision to articulate a creative solution to one of the thorniest issues in the dispute, which of course is the future of the stretch of Armenian territory between Azerbaijan and its Nakhchivan exclave. Okay, I've never seen this word before in my life. This is what we do here. We learn live. All right. Where is this? All right. So here we have Azerbaijan. Or I'm sorry, we have Armenia here, Azerbaijan here, and apparently this is a contested land. Is a village in the most populous municipality in the Kingarlian district of Nakhchivan, Azerbaijan. Okay. So if that's part of... Okay. All right. I see. So this is part of Azerbaijan, and you've got Armenia in the middle. So presumably this is a contested territory, probably part of what the war's been. Now you've got this. Oh my goodness. Okay, well, you just looking at a map, you can see why these countries are fighting. So you got Azerbaijan here with a little circle. It looks like this is probably Armenia. Yep, this is a little circle of Armenia here within Azerbaijan. Then you have a little circle of Azerbaijan here within Armenia. And then you have a whole nother section of Azerbaijan, which is split in two by Armenia. No wonder why these countries have been fighting. This is probably what they've been fighting over, right? Borders. Who owns what? And of course, these countries were formerly all part of the Soviet Union. So presumably, and I'm sure this is probably correct, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, exactly, MG. I had no idea. But these countries were part of the Soviet Union. I don't think Turkey was, but I know Georgia was. Remember, Russia invaded Georgia back in the 20 teens. So you had all these countries, and then the Soviet Union collapsed, and this happened all across with a lot of these nations. Is they had to kind of establish their own autonomy and figure out what their borders were, and this was all kind of happening all at the same time, more or less. It was a very quick collapse of the Soviet Union. So all these nations. Basically, the way it happened was a lot of these nations kind of came together and declared their independence from the Soviet Union, and that essentially is what caused the collapse. Obviously, a lot of things led up to this, but all these nations over here were previously not India, obviously, but not China, not Mongolia, but they were all part of this Soviet Union. Remember, of course, they were the Russians, the Soviets were invading Afghanistan for a long time, which was always a friendly country with the Soviets. There was some sort of, I remember reading or learning about this, but there was some sort of dispute between a politician in Afghanistan and a politician in Russia, which resulted in a clash that resulted in a war that ended up lasting almost 10 years. And it basically bled out the Soviet coffers. It bled them out militarily and financially. Believe it or not. So, and that, of course, led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. And now you've got these countries that are having these crazy disputes. Oh, here's another little circle of presumably, yep, this is Azerbaijan again in Armenia. This is wild. I don't think this exists anywhere else in the world, but I'd have to zoom in and really study the map to know for sure. But it's very, very crazy. You got Azerbaijan here and here and here and here, and then you've got Armenia here and here. Now, this is as of today, right? So we don't know what's going to change here. Let's read. Future of a stretch of Armenian territory between Azerbaijan and its. So the dispute, it seems, is this territory here, that which is between this Nakhchivan, area and the rest of Azerbaijan. So this is what they're kind of figuring out what's going to happen. So let's see. The agreement signed on Friday at the White House by Trump, Aliyev, and Pashinyan. Oh man, I'm just destroying these names. My apologies. Will see the United States administer a stretch of southern Armenia along Armenia's border with Iran, known as the Zangezur Corridor. So let's look again. I presume, so this is Iran right here. So this corridor presumably would be here somewhere. All right. The agreement signed on Friday. An American company will further develop transportation links in the region, which in Trumpian fashion will be named after the president. Oh, Jesus. To connect Azerbaijan and Nakhichevan. So the United States is going to be building some sort of transportation system that links the main part of Azerbaijan with this province or this region, which would presumably cut through Armenia at some point. Interesting. But Armenia is agreeing to this. Trump has privately expressed his desire to win the Peace Prize, blah, blah, blah. We don't really care about that. We're not here to talk about peace prizes. Well, this does talk about some of the other conflicts. So Trump has taken credit for de-escalating brewing conflicts between India and Pakistan. He did kind of, I think, do some things back when they had that big dog fight earlier in the year. Later, Thailand and Cambodia, we covered that in the last couple of weeks, as well as the ceasefire between Rwanda black militants in East Congo and the Congolese central government. Interestingly enough, the next thing I'm about to talk about is that very thing, which would appear to conflict this statement. So we're going to see, we're going to learn about that. In sum, the White House and the president claim that Trump has thus far stopped 6 wars, averaging about a war a month. All right. I think this pretty much covers that. So, of course, this is an extremely important area of the world. You got the Caspian Sea here, and then you got the Black Sea here. You got Russia up here, and then this, of course, is the Crimea, the peninsula or whatever, this area that sticks out from southern Ukraine. So this is a very, very important part of the world because you've got the Caspian Sea, which borders Iran, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and Russia. So presumably there's a lot of trade that happens around here. And then when you have conflicts with countries that have borders, they border the water, that presents issues for the region. And then you've got, let's see, Armenia. And then, so Russia, of course, has the Black Sea. And then there are the trade routes that go through Istanbul, formerly known, of course, as Constantinople, so this is all just a very historically extremely important region, especially the Black Sea to the Mediterranean Sea, which, of course, leads to the ocean. So this is the Caucasus. They talk about the Caucasus. You hear people talk about the Caucasus. What is the Caucasus? Well, that is this right here, this area, these mountains that kind of is in between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea here, right? Caspian Sea. Yep, Caspian Sea. So that is what they talk about when talking about the Caucasus. Let's see what we got here. What's going on? Does this mean Mexico owns Nebraska? Always had my suspicions. Yeah, no, who knows? I mean, that just looking at the map of that area, I mean, it's very evident why they're fighting. If countries are claiming small areas within other countries, there's going to be disputes. So presumably this deal, which there wasn't unfortunately a lot of details in that, I assume it's going to come out in the coming week or two. What's going to happen with those small areas of land? Are those the areas of land they're contesting, or is it that part of Armenia that splits Azerbaijan in two? Every little group of land there probably has its own story, and its own history as to why it's X, Y, or Z. But a lot of really tough history out of that area. Of course, the first genocide of the 1900s. Oh, my camera's gone crazy. The first genocide of the 1900s, people say, was the Armenian genocide, when I think 1.5 or so million Armenians were murdered. So these regions have a lot of history, and you hear that I'm a big metalhead, so you hear the band System of a Down talk about stuff like this. But it's not usually going to be front page news in the United States, which is why I wanted to bring it up. And because these two countries, they have been fighting multiple wars over the years, pretty much since, the early 90s when the Soviet Union fell. So it'll be interesting to see if these deals hold, because they've had a lot of on and off conflicts, basically. It's been a longer ongoing conflict that has had some dead spots where there wasn't a lot going on, and then other times where there was. So that's what you have going on in Armenia and Azerbaijan. And last, what I alluded to, we're going to talk about the Congo again for a little bit. So we've got Rwanda-backed rebels have killed at least 80 civilians in recent weeks, say Congolese authorities. Now, just to, you know what? We should probably, real quick, let's add this plot. And this is not going to be a dangerous color. This is going to be more like, blue's probably good. Blue's probably good. So peace question mark between Armenia and Azerbaijan. All right, we make that blue because maybe it's good. Maybe something good is coming out of this section of the world. And just, I'm gonna make my points visible from previous weeks. You see, it's this strip of the world right here where everything almost is happening. We had over here, we were talking about Pakistan and India a little bit. Then you had those brief clashes with Cambodia and Thailand. And then we've had some stuff in Africa. But even the stuff in Africa, if you look, it's all almost directly south of this one strip. It's really wild how, kind of all the wars and conflicts, more or less, are happening kind of in this area. This one longitude. We don't really talk about longitudes, but oddly enough, it's all kind of happening here. So we go down, we look at Congo. Of course, that's Congo, basically directly south of Ukraine, which is directly south of Israel, believe it or not. Pretty wild. So Rwanda, a very small country. I'm sure some of you have seen the movie Hotel Rwanda, talking about the genocide that happened there a long time ago in the 90s. Obviously, in Africa, genocide, unfortunately, it's been a common thing. We're looking right here at South Sudan, which broke away from Sudan in the early teens because of genocide. You've had genocides in Uganda, Burundi, the Congo, Ethiopia, Somalia. I mean, this whole part of Africa has just suffered immensely for a long time. Up north, you have Egypt, which for the most part has been pretty stable. Although, in 10 years ago or so, they had a big revolution there, and when they ousted Mubarak. So a lot of instability in Africa. We just don't talk about it as much because there's so much instability in the Middle East, and then there's so much instability with Russia and its neighbors. In the last 20 years, Russia's invaded Crimea, they've invaded Georgia, they've invaded Chechnya, they've invaded Ukraine multiple times. So we don't talk about Africa a lot, but that's why I like to bring it up. So we were talking about, we just said something about Donald Trump brokering a peace deal between these rebels and the Congo government, presumably. So we will read about that real quick. Rwanda-backed rebels have killed at least 80 people in eastern Congo in recent weeks, Congolese authorities said, despite an ongoing Qatar-led peace process aiming to end the conflict. So the AP is saying that this peace process is being led by Qatar and not Donald Trump. But we'll see if they mention anything about Trump in this article here. Because that, in the political article we just read, Trump has claimed to end 6 wars, this being one of them. Although obviously we're reading about civilians being massacred, so it doesn't seem to be over. Decades-long conflict, another conflict that's been going on for many years, ravaging Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, escalated earlier this year when the M23 rebel group seized 2 key cities with the help of Rwandan forces. Congo has long been racked by deadly conflict in its mineral-rich east, with more than 100 armed groups active. So there's a lot of resources in the Congo. I think there's gold, diamonds. Who knows if there's probably oil and stuff too. There's probably lots of. Let's just look real quick. East Congo resources. Let's see what AI has to tell us. Possesses vast and diverse natural resources, particularly minerals. Okay. Significant deposits of cobalt, copper, diamonds, gold, coltan, which is tantalum, whatever that is, tin, and tungsten. The eastern provinces are rich in these 3 T minerals, tin, tantalum, and tungsten. The DRC is a major global supplier, holding over half of the world's cobalt reserves and an estimated 60 to 80% of global coltan reserves. Wow. So That's wild. So they hold a vast amount of reserves for some very important resources. So they got the majority of the world's cobalt and a majority of the world's coltan. That's very interesting. So you would understand then why maybe there's conflict, because there's probably a lot of groups trying to jockey for power over these resources because they know the amount of wealth that they hold. And then, of course, the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo probably just simply isn't strong enough when you've got 100 armed groups active in your area. I mean, where do you even begin as a government to try and get some of those people either allied with you or to fight against them? The continuing violence could threaten the efforts to get Congo and the rebels to sign a permanent deal by August 18th, as hoped for. One of the deal's conditions is the protection of civilians and the safe return of millions of displaced people. So a lot of people have been displaced. The Congolese army said in a statement late Friday that it is fiercely condemning what it described as a series of mass murders of civilians in South Kivu. All right. Let us find Kivu, the Democratic Republic of Congo. This should be on the east side. All right. Yep. Bordering Rwanda. We will add a mark. So we've got Rwandese backed rebels killing civilians in the DRC. This is all part of a long-going conflict, which they're in the process of doing peace deals. It seemed in that other article like Trump had said that it already happened, but apparently it's not being followed. Congolese army said in a statement late Friday that is fiercely condemning what it described as a series of mass murders of civilians. It said that 80 people were killed on August 4th in the village of Nyabarongo, and that 6 civilians, including 2 minors, were murdered on the 24th of July in Lumbishi. It blamed the RDF M23 AFC coalition, which includes the rebel groups M23 and AFC backed by the Rwandan Defense Force, Rwanda Defense Force, the RDF. All right. In addition to this excessive criminality, the M23 AFC is engaged in the forced recruitment of young people, including minors, to join their illegal organization. There was no immediate comment from the M23. When asked for a comment, the Rwandan Foreign Minister Olivier J.P. Ngundiri told the Associated Press that he could not comment on any stupidity coming from the DRC, using the acronym of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Earlier this month, the UN Human Rights Chief said that M23 killed 319 people over the past month in a different part of the region, describing the toll as one of the largest of such documented attacks since the M23 rebels came back in 2022. Citing firsthand accounts, UN Human Rights Chief Turk said in a statement that the rebels, backed by members of the Rwandan Defense Force, targeted 4 villages in North Kivu province of Rutshuru territory between July 9th and the 21st. M23 denied the accusations and called the UN statement unverified and politically motivated. These allegations constitute a blatant manipulation of the facts, a violation of basic principles of impartiality, and a serious attack on the credibility of UN institutions. So the two sides on July 19th had signed a declaration of principles in Qatar to end the fighting and commit to a comprehensive peace agreement that would include the restoration of state authorities in key eastern cities. So last month, almost a month ago, they signed a declaration stating that they were going to try to end the fighting. All right. So I think it seemed in that previous article, Trump more or less said that was a peace deal, which it doesn't seem like it was. It seems like that was just a deal to begin the efforts, more or less. And that has not resulted in an end to the fighting. So In Africa, let's see. Let's just look at the map here real quick again. But, this is all south of Sudan. There were millions of refugees here, million here, a couple million here. I mean, this part of Central Africa is just extremely hard hit. And you can only imagine the countries around these countries are having to absorb these refugees, and it's not helping their situations either. Ethiopia has never really been prosperous. So if there's refugees flooding in from Sudan, South Sudan, from the DRC or Congo or wherever, it's not helping any of these situations. And I've stated before, this is the largest humanitarian crisis in the world right now, is what's happening around in these couple of Central African countries. It does outweigh what's happening in Gaza. With Gaza, it's much more centralized into a small location, where it is 2 million ish refugees. In Africa, you've got this spread out over thousands, tens of thousands of square miles, square kilometers, with these, and you've got many millions, probably 5 to 10, possibly million refugees spread out throughout Africa. And it's a very difficult situation to wrap your head around. Again, we just read there's over 100 different armed groups in the DRC alone. That's just the Democratic Republic of Congo. And then you've got very mineral rich countries. Of course, we mentioned multiple times that Qatar, a Middle Eastern country, is brokering these deals. It's probably because they're extracting minerals and stuff. Middle Eastern countries are meddling in African affairs. Russia is meddling in African affairs. Surely the United States is meddling in African affairs. Not a lot of help is happening for the people of Africa, yet all these powerful nations are kind of jockeying for position in this continent. And it is due largely because, as far as remaining minerals and resources, a lot of South America has been tapped, a lot of Asia and Europe. To talk about in Ukraine, there was just a big mineral deal that was done between the United States and Ukraine. But presumably you would think Ukraine's probably had a lot of resources extracted from it over the years, since it has more or less kind of been a little more stable than, say, Africa. But this is kind of the last part of the world where there is just extremely rich deposits. And they're going to come at a price for especially the people of Africa, who have to deal with all these conflicts that are happening, which seemingly have seen no end. Africa has had consistent wars now for many, many decades. You had a lot of different countries over the decades have had their hands in African affairs. We talked about the ones right now. For a long time, you had France, you had especially England, Great Britain, all over in Africa. They speak English in a large part of Africa for a reason. It wasn't an accident. You know what I mean? That came because of decades of occupation from many different countries. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in Africa over the coming years, and it'll be interesting to see how much of a interest the United States government under Trump takes in trying to broker peace. I'm sure there's some sort of deal where the United States would get some rights to certain minerals and stuff in an effort to broker this peace. But ultimately, you have millions of people in Africa right now that are refugees, that are living that kind of a life. And really, they just need stability in the area. South Sudan broke away from Sudan in hopes of having stability. And since then, Sudan has suffered another civil war. And South Sudan has had conflict itself. It's still a very unsafe country to be living in. So, yeah, very unfortunate news out of the DRC. But yeah, that wraps it up for today. Let me get to my end screen here. I will be back either tomorrow or the next day. Going to do a little in-depth portion on, we're going to talk about what's happening with Ukraine and Russia either tonight, or I'm sorry, not tonight, but either tomorrow or the next day. So that'll be next for us. Again, hey, MG, thanks for hanging around. I appreciate you. Seawell as well, thank you for hanging around. Anybody else who checked out the stream, I really appreciate you. And we'll be back very soon. Hope you all have a lovely day.